All right, this story kind of relates to something I said in one of my Canelo Bivol post-fight videos where I talked about the possibility that Canelo might be thinking that Eddie Hearn doesn't have enough clout to get him a fair decision in a fight like he had against Dimitri Bivol, because Canelo publicly said that he thought he won the fight. So if in Canelo's mind he thinks he won, is he looking at Eddie Hearn and saying, you don't have enough power in the game to actually get the judges to see it my way in this type of fight? The way that perhaps Oscar De La Hoya did. Now, obviously, Canelo doesn't like Golden Boy and De La Hoya, and he feels like they did him dirty or whatever. I get that. But there are other promoters out there. And so, again, I don't know that Canelo's thinking this. I'm just floating the possibility out there. Now, this particular article on Boxing Scene, again, it talks about what I mentioned. Well, Eddie Hearn specifically talks about what I mentioned. So listen to what he says here. He says, the disadvantage for Devin, and of course he's talking about Devin Haney, I forgot to mention, fighting George Kambosos. And he says the disadvantage for Devin, obviously this was part of having to take the ESPN deal, is that he doesn't really have representation. We're not working together on the fight because obviously he had to do this ESPN deal. But he's the big B-side in this fight. So he doesn't have a powerful promoter backing him in his corner. When they get to when they get to the ground, when they get to the venue, the promoter is making sure that everyone is comfortable with the officials, making sure that the ring's okay. Goes on to say, and he's talking about Dillian Whyte's recent fight against Tyson Fury here. He says, you know the game. I've seen it before. The same with Dillian Whyte, really. I felt like it really affected him. You turn up and you feel like you're the opponent. Now, okay, finally, he says, as I said, Devin is very strong mentally. He knows what he needs to do in this fight. He's going to be up against, 30,000 fans, and they'll be cheering for George Kambosos. He's in their backyard. Even if he wins, he has to go back and do the rematch in Australia. You couldn't have it more against you, but respect to him. He's going there to make it happen, and we're fully behind him. Okay, now, the line that I really want to focus on here is where he says, making sure that everyone is comfortable with the officials. Now, we know that there is a lot of corruption in boxing by way of judging. Judges tend to see it the way of the house fighter 9 times out of 10. Maybe 9 times out of 10 isn't high enough. Maybe it's more like 99 times out of 100. So that clearly is corruption, right? Because it's bias. Now, well, let me rewind it. Not say it's corruption. It may be corruption, but it's certainly bias. Okay, let me rewind it back there, remix it. It may be corruption, but it's certainly bias. Why is it bias? Is it because promoters are giving certain officials a lot of work? Is it because promoters are wining and dining certain officials, putting them up in nice hotels and taking them out to dinner? Is it because there's actual brown envelopes underneath the table? Who knows? But we've all seen this bias in action many, many times. And it's so endemic in boxing that when you get a close fight between the A side and the B side, we automatically assume that they're going to give it to the A side. Very rarely do we think, oh, the B side may well get it. We're all just, oh, God, I bet they give it to the A side here. He's really lost the fight by a couple points, but I bet they give it to him. That's what we're mainly expecting. So, again, this speaks to this widespread bias that judges have in favor of the house fighter. And therefore, think about the power that you get from having a promoter that can make you this brand name, right? A brand name promoter that has power in the game to be able to get this bias in favor of his fighters. In the United States, Eddie Hearn has a certain amount of power, yes, but is he as powerful in terms of within the boxing establishment as Bob Arum, as Al Heyman PBC? You see, this is what I'm not sure about, because there's certainly a lot of hate for Eddie Hearn out there. There's certainly a lot of people who want to see him fail. You've pretty much got the whole of the boxing establishment ganging up against him. You know? So again, I don't know what Canelo was thinking, but it's possible that he thinks Eddie Hearn doesn't have the clout to get him the kind of decisions he wants. And I'm not saying that in Canelo's head he's thinking, I want biased judges. No, if Canelo genuinely thinks he won the fight, then it's not about him wanting biased judges. It's about him wanting judges that are going to appreciate his work. That's how Canelo may see it if he genuinely thinks he won the fight. So anyway, but as far as Devin Haney, I've spoken about this in previous videos. Haney really is up against it. He is the B-side in a major way. I mean, he's the B-side in the most extreme form. So he's got to go over to Australia. He's literally ticked every single box. He's bent over backwards and done everything that George Kambosos asked for him. And even if he wins the first fight, he has to go back to Australia for the rematch. People, that's crazy. I struggle to see how Devin Haney is going to come away from this fight as the winner. Now, he might be the winner in the eyes of the fans. I don't know. We'll see how the fight plays out. But I'm talking about officially. I struggle to see how Devin Haney comes away with the win. Because, and of course, I saw that same thing with Dimitri Bivol. I thought, okay, Bivol's a good fighter. This fight's probably going to go the distance. He can be competitive. He can maybe outbox Canelo, but is he going to get a decision? I don't think so. And obviously I was wrong in that situation there. Bivol was able to get the decision. Something I never thought anybody would be able to get over Canelo. I thought in order to get a decision over Canelo, you'd have to drop him a few times. You'd have to bust up his face. Bivol didn't need to go to those extremes. He did clearly outbox him. But again, there are other fights where Canelo was clearly outboxed, such as the Mayweather fight, and one of the judges had it a draw. That's crazy. And that's when Canelo wasn't the star that he is today. Canelo's got more clout now than he did when he fought Mayweather. And even back then, against one of the biggest fighters in history. Well, if you're talking about commercially, he is the biggest fighter in history, Floyd Mayweather. But I'm talking about clout. Mayweather had a lot of clout, and yet they still gave the fight a draw on one of the scorecards. So I'm figuring, fast forward all these years, Canelo's a much bigger name now, much more pull in the industry. Nobody's getting a decision over this guy unless you're nailing him to the canvas. If you knock him out cold, you might get a draw. You know, them ones. So Bivol turned that on his head. Some people say, well, they still tried to rob Bivol. Yeah, it's not about tried. If they really want to, they will. And perhaps remix that again. Perhaps they tried, but there are levels of trying. Because I've seen some absolutely obscene decisions in boxing. I've seen people win fights far more convincingly than Dimitri Bivol. And he won convincingly, but I've seen guys beat the other dude up and not get the decision. Like literally beat him up, batter him around the ring, from pillar to post and not get the decision. So, if Bivol had lost the fight on the judges' scorecards, it would have been a horrible, horrible robbery, yes, but not the worst I've seen. Not by a long shot. So I'm aware that they can go that far. They can take it to that level in terms of bias, corruption, whatever you want to call it, and do crazy stuff. So anyway, I say all that to talk about Devin Haney's chances against George Kambosos in terms of winning the decision. He's really got to go out there and stop the guy, take it out of the judge's hands. Will there be fair officiating? I hope there will. But again, as when it comes to the officiating in boxing, I'm as cynical as most boxing fans are. And I'm expecting if it's a close fight, or even if it's a fight that Haney deserves to win by a couple rounds, they're going to give it to George Kambosos. That's the assumption I'm making. So I'm not expecting Devin Haney to come back with the belt. Now, as far as Eddie Hearn saying Haney is probably not going to be looked after like that, he's going to feel like the B-side. Well, what else could Devin Haney do? Right? Eddie Hearn tried to make the Kambosos fight, but apparently it couldn't happen. They couldn't get a deal done. Eddie Hearn seems to be an issue because he's being blackballed by a lot of promoters out there. They don't want to work with Eddie Hearn. They don't want to help him out. You know? They'd rather take his fighters away from him for a couple fights and have them fight on their promotions and on their terms rather than meet Eddie Hearn and do like a 50-50, you know? So what else could Devin Haney do? Nothing, it seems. He's the B-side, and this really shows how much he wanted to fight. This clearly shows tremendous confidence from Devin Haney to go all the way over to Australia and give up all these advantages. He must really believe in himself to be doing something like that. And if the fight was in the US or the fight was in a neutral location, I may well be picking Haney because I think this is a distance fight. Haney hasn't showed over the past few fights the kind of power necessary to be able to take George Kambosos out. But look, if Devin Haney lands enough shots, I'm sure he can take George Kambosos out. But will he be able to land enough shots in a short enough time window to be able to get that done? I doubt it. I see it as a distance fight. And as such, yeah, I think it's even if Devin Haney deserves it, I doubt he'll get the decision. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below about everything I talked about in this video.